Nope, that's not hyphens. I think it's white ones. And over to you.
You all hear me there? Thanks very much, Bob. Yeah, so I'm John Cryer. I'm working in the conservation team for RSPB Cymru. And I'm going to talk this afternoon a bit about some of the projects we're involved with across Wales. Yeah, so these are projects that happen off our reserves. So Dan's talked a lot about the work that's gone on our reserves. So these are where we're working outside of our actual reserve network. So the conservation team, there's around 20 of us in Wales, and we cover a number of different areas of work. So policy work, legislation that we've heard about through the day, and then, as I say, the projects that I'll get onto shortly. So as I say, the projects are mainly off our reserves, and this is to do with the fact that there's a general understanding and appreciation that we can't halt the loss of biodiversity and the declines in nature that we've seen in recent years just on reserves. They're just too small, they're too isolated. So there was a piece of work a few years ago by Professor Sir John Norton in England, a DEFRA-funded review of wildlife sites in England, that looked at the ability of these sites to cope with climate change and other demands on the land, and also the kind of species and biodiversity within them. And out of that work, there emerged a couple of principles. So they were improving the quality of current sites, increasing the size of current sites, enhancing the connections through corridors or stepping stones, creating new sites, and then reducing pressures on wildlife in the wider environment. Now it's that bit, reducing the pressures outside of sites that I'm going to talk about this afternoon. And that's often been summed up as bigger, better, and more joined up. Okay, so the first project, which I'm sure lots of you may have seen bits and pieces on in the past, is involving twite in Snowdonia. So this is a partnership project. BTO, NRW, National Trust, and then a group of farmers within the Nant-Francon Valley where the project is kind of focused there. So we know the birds are using the valley in the spring and the summer, and then from work through the BTO, Calvin and others, we know that they're wintering in other parts of Wales. So the red outline on the map is the Nant-Francon Valley and the project area, and then the blue outline is where the birds are wintering on the Dee. They're birds through the ring, and we also know they're overwintering on the Pennines, northwest coast of England, Scotland, and over on East Anglia as well. Then the next photo is a view down the valley and shows why this site has remained so good for twite. So the steep valley sides with bracken slopes that we heard a bit about bracken this morning being good for species, or twite like those sites for nesting. And then the flat valley floor has maintained some extensive farming systems, so less intensive systems that have cropped up across Wales, which have resulted in species loss elsewhere. So the current status of twite. So in Birds of Conservation Concern Wales 3, there was a bit of an oddity there. So the twite actually moved from red listed to amber listed. Now this is probably, I'm told, due to the number of records increasing, probably due to the atlas work that's taken place over the last few years. But what we're seeing is a decline of around 40% in the breeding population over the last 25 years, and Wales now holds about 17 to 20 pairs. So the issues for the birds is generally a lack of suitable food sources year-round. So they're granivorous birds, so concentrating on seed, but also the chicks are fed on seed as well, rather than insects like other species. So any lack of seed throughout the year can be a serious issue. And the causes for that are probably due to changes in farming. So it's a loss of mixed farming systems that were a combination of livestock and arable. So you had some spring barley and maybe a hay meadow, maybe a turnip crop in the winter. And alongside those crops, you had a set of seed-rich weeds that would be found there as well. And it was these weeds that the birds were feeding on. So it's the loss of those associated weeds that is the significant factor there. So what we're doing is we're working with farmers across the Namfrancon Valley, looking to provide a year-round seed source. Initially this has been through supplementary feeding, so feeding stations, just while we looked at what we can do elsewhere, and then over the longer term we're looking at longer term management through agri-environment schemes and reintroducing some of the older practices on the farms. And by staggering the management across the valley through the different farms, it takes the pressure off one farm to deliver that, and we can deliver across a series of farms. There's some problems with that. Introducing hay meadows is not massively popular, and that some of the kind of the structure of the field, so the small stony fields, small gateways, make it quite difficult to get machinery in there just for the management. But colleagues have been working to get updates to existing agri-environment schemes. So there were schemes in place, but they weren't quite right. They needed tweaking. So we've managed to change some of those, particularly to get some outfeeding of stocks. There's a SSSI, a special site of special scientific interest. So there's some restrictions from NRW over feeding, outfeeding stock within the designated site. So we've got some derogations there to allow some feeding of hay in March and in April there. So what we learned so far is there's not many birds around. There's low numbers, only 17 to 20 pairs, but actually picking those birds and monitoring is quite difficult. And also the fields and meadows that we're trying to bring back into management have lost some of their botanical diversity, particularly the seed-rich species that we're looking for the twite. So we're having to, not start from scratch, but having to reseed a lot of those fields, which sets us back slightly there. So they've been reseeded with things like dandelions, hawkbits, sorrels, cat's ear, mouse ear, and then some meadow grasses as well. It's early days, but monitoring this year has picked up a couple of flocks of reasonable size. We had a flock of 20 and a flock of 17 birds, and then 8 birds that were recorded on one of the supplementary feeding stations. So going forward, monitoring is the key thing over the next couple of years, alongside the ringing efforts that are going on there, but also monitoring the botanical interest of the fields. So the fields that we're taking time to reseed, just making sure that we are seeing the species coming through that the birds that need for seed there. We'll be carrying out autumn flocks now over the next couple of years at the end of August, and then hopefully we can look to extend the project beyond 2018. Now I do have a request from my colleague Rian, who is the project lead, and she's asked if there's a lot of people in the room that will be out and about through the year, and if you could keep out for twite elsewhere in Wales. So we know that Namfrancon is, and that area is a stronghold for the species, but we also know there's potential for birds to be elsewhere. So I have a comment from Rian that John Lawton Roberts found a nest on Rwabon a few years back. So it's potential that there are other sites and we just haven't picked them up yet. So any records of twite through the breeding season would be very welcome. Okay, so moving on. Oh no, there's a nice picture of some twite nests there. So moving on, another project we've got is the curlew trial. So this is an RSPB-led UK-wide project. It is a partnership project again, and the Welsh project partners are shown here. So working with National Trust, NRW, and the Crown Estate, and a group of farmers, particularly National Trust farmers. There's about 13 National Trust tenant farmers, and then one tenant farmer from the Crown Estate involved in the project as well. So this shows the project area. So the project's focused on the National Trust's Ysbyty Fan Estate, which is outlined in red there. And the main driver for the project, as Yola was pointed out this morning, is the kind of dire situation we find curlew in. UK holds around 25% of the global population, so it's hugely important. In Wales, the declines are significant. We had around 5,000 pairs in the early 90s, which had declined to about 1,000 pairs in 2006. And the Welsh population itself is important as 2% of the global population, so it is significant. Then the main issues appear to be caused by changing habitats, a variety of reasons. There's overgrazing, drainage of sites, and then also improvement for agriculture, and these are all having an impact on the birds. In some areas, a lack of management is probably also an issue, so rush is becoming dominant and just making sites far less suitable for the birds. And another kind of key issue is breeding success is down due to predation, primarily through the main culprits are foxes and crows. So what are we doing? Well, the trial is combining habitat management and predator control, and it's running across 6 sites across the UK. So the sites are paired sites, so we have a trial site paired with a control, and we'll be carrying out habitat management and predator control on the trials, and then just monitoring on the control sites to see what the impacts are. And the sites are between 8 and 10 kilometres squared. So habitat management, just primarily cutting of rush and heather in all weathers, as you can see. This has some of its own kind of issues. A lot of this habitat is designated blanket bog, so NRW have concerns over the impact of any management, so taking machinery up there, and the impact that could have on the vegetation structure. So we're closely monitoring the vegetation structure of these sites as well, just to make sure we're not having any detrimental impact on the vegetation there. So the habitat management, as I say, is being combined with predator control. So there's control of foxes between December and July, where they're carrying out some shooting at night. And then also there's crow trapping between March and June, using larsen traps. The predator control, really, from our RSPB point of view, is a last-ditch attempt to try and reverse the declines in the species. As we see, they are pretty desperate, and as Yola said this morning, his comments regarding potential extinction, then if we're going to do something, we do need to take drastic measures. The outcome so far, so in Wales there was actually no predator control carried out last year, just due to the time to taken to appoint a contractor. So predator control will start on the site in Wales in the coming December. So the monitoring so far, so monitoring's been carried out across the 6 UK sites, and 14 nests were found across those sites. And kind of illustrating the point really, 9 of those were predated before hatching. Also been monitoring the predator numbers across the sites. And the early monitoring does suggest that the control that was carried out on the other sites in the UK, that the numbers have come down slightly, but it's just a bit too early to tell yet. In terms of curlew numbers, there were an average of 14 pairs per 10 kilometres square across the sites, which was slightly up on last year, but again, it is very early. But what we did see was the sites with the combined habitat management and predator control had the greatest increase. And breeding success across the sites did appear to be up, with about 40% of pairs hatching at least 1 chick. And we think it's probably linked to the lower number of foxes that were picked up this year. But obviously time will tell that. Okay, so moving on. Next project is a golden plover project. And there's definitely a theme here. It's a partnership project again. See the partners there's Winstay Estate, National Trust and Crown Estate again, NRW, and then again a group of farmers that have been involved. The project covers 3 main areas across Wales, with sites within these areas. So we've got the Mignau, Arenig, Diawt, SAC in the lower left there, the Mynydd Hiraethog in the middle, and then a site out at Rwabon on the right-hand side there. So the main driver appears to be addressing the population decline. Decline's been around 89% in the breeding population over the last 25 years. And similar to the curlew, the issues seem to be to do with habitat. Sites that they've traditionally used to become rank and overgrown with rush being a particular issue, potentially driven or probably driven by changes in farming practice. Sites are impacted by drainage and then some undergrazing, and it's basically the sward is just completely unsuitable for golden plover. So what we're doing, again, similar to the curlew trial, there's cutting going on, trying to open up the sward, bring in some a bit more diversity and just allow the birds a bit more access. And again, these are the same designated sites as earlier, so we're still having to monitor the impact on vegetation structure to make sure the actual management is not having any detrimental impact on the underlying habitat there. And critically, at the same time, we're working with farmers to try and develop management that can maintain these sites over the longer term. So looking at appropriate grazing levels to try and avoid the progression into kind of too much rush and rank heather and things going in the future. In terms of results so far, the Ruabon site, which has been managed since 2011, had 2 pairs in 2014, which declined down to 0 pairs this year within the project boundary, but there were 3 pairs actually just outside of the project boundary, so we're not too worried about the fact that they weren't in the project area. On the midnight, first management was carried out last year, and there's been an increase from 2 pairs in 2014 up to 3 pairs this year. And then there's 3 sites across Mynydd Hiraethog, and breeding was last recorded in these sites in 1999 and 2005. The management actually started on these sites in the 2013-2014 season, and has been ongoing over the last 3 years. And in 2014 we had 3 pairs, 2015 2 pairs, and 2016 there's 2 pairs again. So just to demonstrate the quick progress, not a great photo, but this photo was taken in May on one of the midnight sites. And it's a site where no breeding had been recorded recently. This was an area that had been cut about a month before one of my colleagues was up there and took this picture. Just after taking the picture of the male bird, he flushed the female as well. And then on a second visit 6 weeks later, 1 pair had become 2 pairs, and 1 pair had chicks as well. So there's some hopefully some pretty quick progress there. And a nice picture of golden plover to make up for the last picture there. So the final project I'll talk about is a species that's been spoken about already today, in Greenland white-fronted geese. So lots of us have been following the plight really of Greenland white-fronted geese in Wales over the last few years. Again, it's a partnership project looking at 2 areas in the Dyfi where the birds have been traditionally for a number of years now, and then also Maltraeth where birds have been found or starting to appear over the last couple of years. Partners in the project, so obviously Mick's been very involved in the project. WWT, the Dyfi Wildfowlers, Welsh Government, NRW and Basque as well. Okay, so we're dealing with a population here on the Dyfi particularly that's crashing, similar to curlew. The Dyfi population's dropped by about 83% since the early 90s, so it's again it's drastic measures really. There's a few issues that have been identified. So there's some issues on the breeding grounds in Greenland. So the breeding distribution's contracting, and less than 1/3 of the females there are actually breeding. So there are concerns there. But also there is issues over the decline of the quality of the habitat on their wintering sites in Wales, plus some issues with disturbance as well. So the causes of or one of the key causes of the decline is the site loyalty that the birds show. So they're returning to these sites year on year. So any decline in the condition of the sites is having a significant impact. Again, rush seems to be a factor here with sites becoming rush dominated, and the birds would prefer a much shorter rush-free sward. So what the project's looking to do is, with funding from Welsh Government, that India NRW was, I think, leave it out of them there, is purchasing some GPS tags and then carry out some field work to find out where the birds are actually spending their time. to help us get a better idea of the distribution on the sites they're using in Wales. So the aim is to tag a couple of birds this winter, and the goals of the tags are to try and identify the particular areas they're using. So I was told they're using creek systems around the Dyfi, and I'm hoping this is a fair illustration of the creek systems on the salt marsh there. So the birds are getting in there and they're quite difficult to get in and monitor. So the GPS tags will tell us where they are, and then we can go in afterwards and look and see what they're feeding on and try and identify what some of the issues are there. The tags will also tell us the routes the birds are using on migration. So the routes they're taking and the sites they're using on their way back to Greenland in the spring. And then they'll also store data throughout the summer season on Greenland, which will actually, the tags will store the data and then download that on the return journey as they pass a site in Iceland, I believe. Again, we're dealing with a population of such low numbers that we can't wait for the learning to happen to start to actually do something. So the partnerships are also looking to work up potential management prescriptions, because we don't have time to wait. We have to start doing as much as we can as soon as possible. And also I know Mick's been looking for the birds on Maltrife, where they're using the site up there, and trying to get a picture of how they're using the site, and which particular areas of the site the birds are spending their time in. I believe they're pretty difficult to find, particularly at Maltrife, but working with the site staff, I think we're starting to get a bit of a picture.
If anyone ever goes birding on Anglesey in the winter, please keep an eye out, because they only spend a little bit of time on that tribe, and we have no idea where they turned up at the lake in North Anglesey after this last winter. So we do need help on Anglesey, please.
Okay, so the next step, so while tagging the birds this winter is critical, and with the birds, as far as I'm aware, not being back so far, that's quite a concern. We get very limited attempts to try and get the tags on the birds. So there's going to be cannon netting carried out to try and catch the birds to place the tags on, with some help from WT staff from Scotland who've been carrying out this work in the past. But we only get 2 chances to try and cannon net the birds due to the impact of disturbance. We don't want to upset them too much because obviously they're under immense pressure already. And with the decline in numbers, getting them on as soon as possible is critical because we may not get a second chance really. And then securing further funding is going to be absolutely vital, and hopefully then maybe others can try and leave us some more money out of Welsh Government. Which brings me on to something that was talked about earlier today. So Welsh Government had carried out a consultation on the conservation of white-fronted geese in Wales. The Cabinet Secretary for the Environment and Rural Affairs had made a statement and released a statement earlier in the year. And RSPB were bitterly disappointed in the decision, which leaves Wales as one of the only countries where the birds can still be legally shot. We just hope that Welsh Government will honour their commitments in their statement to funding further research. Hopefully we know a project that would be right for some of that funding, and act on any findings that come out of this research accordingly. And that's pretty much it for me, so thank you very much. Thanks for listening.